Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. Chris Hostetler, and he's going to chat about three pivotal studies from the last 5 years in the swine industry. So thanks for joining here today, Chris, and welcome to the show.
Absolutely, Marcio. It's my privilege and honor to be here. I'm excited for our time together today.
Awesome. Thank you. And first thing is if you can share with us, for those that don't know you, about your career and also how you got started in the pig industry.
Sure. I got started in the pig industry as a 12-year-old kid who farrowed out 20 sows for a neighbor and took care of all their piglets and managed them all the way through until they were ready to be weaned. I think he paid me something like $3 a piglet, and we probably averaged about 7 pigs weaned per sow, and that was a lot of candy for me back when I was 12 years old.
That's awesome.
So that was my first job in the industry, but I was a farm kid raised on a hog and corn and soybean farm in Indiana, and have always enjoyed understanding the physiology of animals, and always curious and always driven by the question why around why things work from a biology standpoint. Went to Purdue University for my undergraduate degrees, just like every other farm kid in Indiana. Purdue land grant there as an animal science major, and stuck with it. Became interested in research as a junior in college, and did a research project with Mark Dieckmann looking at the use of melatonin in gilts and their age at puberty. And that was really my opportunity to get exposure to research. And I went to University of Florida for a master's degree. I was really intrigued around the maternal recognition of pregnancy, which is the early phases of pregnancy, and the fact that we lose about 30% of our embryos within the first 30 days of pregnancy. Just an amazing opportunity for improvement there, I think. And so I went down there for my master's degree, and then went to Washington State University for my Ph.D. And while I was there, I managed their research and teaching swine farm. Cool. So I was responsible for allocating the animals to the research trials, making sure we had enough animals for research trials, but then also coordinating all of the teaching efforts that went on at the farm, as well as managing the labor. So it gave me a true sense of appreciation for the production aspects of it. I stayed and did a postdoctoral study in the School of Molecular Biosciences. Oh, wow. Enjoyed my time there. I worked on the genetic regulation of spermatogenesis in rats and mice with a model organisms for studying human reproduction, but really missed the agriculture aspects of it. And that's probably the most important thing that my postdoc taught me was that I really missed being involved with the agricultural aspect. So I took a faculty position at South Dakota State University, teaching monogastric nutrition for graduate students, as well as the general nutrition class for undergraduates. Enjoyed my time in the classroom, enjoyed working with bright, intelligent minds, and kind of that next generation of producer. But when the job came open here at the National Pork Board about 9 years ago, that really allowed me to work directly with the producers. I applied for it and was successful in getting that. And it's been an interesting, very interesting and rewarding career change for me.
Super nice. Yeah, it's cool that sometimes we do the graduate program trying to fix these issues, right? They mentioned the embryonic losses. For me, my reason was right after winning, the pigs don't eat. But the funny part is that I haven't fixed it. I don't think you have fixed it, but at least you tried, right?
Yeah, for one of the things that my master's taught me was we looked at embryonic mortality from a biochemical signaling between the fetus and the mother, right? Mm-hmm. How does the fetus signal its presence so that the mother doesn't come back into heat, right? And really I got to thinking, well, maybe we don't, maybe we think we know how to feed sows in gestation, but I'll bet we don't know what the nutritional requirements of a developing fetus is, right? And so how could we begin to attack that problem? And so that's how I came to be a swine nutritionist. When I was hired as a faculty member at South Dakota State, I had never actually even ran a metabolism study. And so to be a nutritionist coming at it from a different angle, I think was really rewarding for me. But really what that says is I'm interested in animal science in general, right? I'm interested in lots of different things, interested in genetics and interested in reproduction and nutrition and management practices. And really for me, I think of myself as a true animal scientist, right? A true generalist rather than more specific as a nutritionist or a geneticist or a reproductive biologist. So anyways, it really fits my wheelhouse to work for the National Pork Board.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, that's super cool. Cool. Well, getting into the topic of today, Chris, what are the 3 pivotal studies then, in your opinion, from the last 5 years?
Yeah, well, certainly the National Pork Board has invested a lot of producer money in things such as promotion, things such as training and certification program. And the third aspect of that is the research aspect. And we have funded lots of research projects to address problems that producers are having on their farm each and every day. The legacy goes back, to the mid to late 90s when Rodney Goodwin and David Meeker were doing research around, genetic improvement of pigs and for meat quality and longevity and that sort of thing. So the maternal line study and the terminal sire index from the late 90s, those are some of our more historical research projects that we did back in the day. We've really changed our philosophy a lot since then, but if we fast forward, but I would say that the one unifying characteristic has been that it is producer driven. Right? So we have producers that have served faithfully on the Animal Science Committee or on task forces and work groups that really shape the direction and focus for the research programs that we have at the National Pork Board. And they are the ones that choose what priorities to work on so that they can answer problems that they're facing each and every day. And they're the ones that select the protocols, the research projects that ultimately they end up funding at the end of the day. I'm just the guy that works on the other side to kind of help all of that happen. And so, that is sort of the common thread through it all. But if we fast forward to, say, 2010, I know that's not within your last 5 years.
That's fine.
But there's an amazing story to be told around the sequencing of the pig genome. And so in 2010, the Animal Science Committee members were meeting. And during that meeting, they had a discussion about the beef cattle genome project that the USDA had just undertaken to support the sequencing of the beef cattle genome. And the guys at the Animal Science Committee said, why in the world aren't we doing that in the pigs? We should be doing that in pigs. And so they put up $600,000 of their money. They partnered with Iowa and Minnesota Pork, and they had another $300,000 that those two organizations shared. And so for $900,000, we began that project. The USDA then picked up that project because our producers were willing to invest in it. They picked that up and put an additional $10 million into the project. And then the International Pig Genome Sequencing picked it up, and they ultimately put in about $40 million worth of that. And in 2012, we published the first genetic sequence for pig. And so for a $600,000 at the national level and a $900,000 investment, the producers were able to leverage that not only in the ultimately in the sequence of the pig genome, but also through other monetary support. Right, we turned that into a $50 million project with a $900,000 initial investment, and that I don't care how you do that math, that return on that investment is huge.
Yeah,
right?
It's huge. Yeah. So is that in that case? were all that money used for that project, or could you use in others, and also why does it cost that much?
Yeah, so back in the day, it cost that much. And back in the day, it took years to sequence a genome. And now, because of technology has improved so much in the 10 years or 12 years that has the intervening 10 or 12 years, the cost is much less to sequence the pig genome. But now we have the basis for it. And now we can simply go through and begin to improve the annotation of the pig genome itself, so that we have a better understanding of what particular genes do and the role that they play in biology. But it serves as a great tool for researchers when they are trying to improve things like disease resistance, right? And so they can identify those genes that convey the resistance to certain diseases, and then they can make changes in those genes to convey that resistance. And so, it's just one example of the way that the pig genome is being used today to help pork producers.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge. It's huge to think. I didn't know it started right there. Yeah, that's super cool. Anything else on the sequencing before we move to the next one?
Yeah, I think we use it a lot for, we talk about disease resistance, but we can also use pigs are a very important biological model for human beings. And I think most recently, our producers may have heard about using CRISPR-Cas9 as a gene editing tool. And ultimately, I think using that, while that might convey some production advantages, right? We might have a pig that for example, secretes phytase, right? So we get better phosphorus utilization in swine diets. But ultimately, I think from a human medical standpoint, that's huge as well, because we can create models to study problems that we're having on the human side, and use pigs to do that for a better of all human beings. So
super cool. Yeah, this is.
It all started in the animal science committee, right? Just sitting around saying we should be doing that, right?
Yes.
And so amazing.
Yes, because you have to understand, right, the basis, if you will, to really be able to do anything on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super cool. What's the next one?
Yeah, so then beginning in about 2012, we started a project looking at improving sow lifetime productivity. And really, some icons in the swine industry, 𝘠𝗵𝗿𝗀 and 𝘠𝗵𝗿𝗏 were instrumental in sort of initiating those projects. We had a working group that studied a research model, and they came up with a consortium approach to conducting that research. And I think that was really our first effort to kind of harness the power of multiple investigators working on a common problem together. And so that project got started really in 2012, continued through 2018. There were two major projects during that time. One was managed by the folks at Clay Center, Nebraska, and the other was managed by George Foxcroft at University of Alberta. The Clay Center project was conducted on Murphy Brown's research farm in Utah, and the University of Alberta's project was conducted at Holden Farms in Minnesota. And both of those organizations are just great partners to have on the research side. Really a lot of intelligence and acumen and dedication around doing research and doing research projects right. And that makes a huge difference when you're trying to collect data from the time a female is born until she's third parity, right? And just tracking all of the possible information from the time she was born all the way through, in terms of vaccinations and boar exposure and heat no service, and then entering the sow herd and nutritional programs around that. And so I think that body of information really, we began to have those research results come out in various formats beginning in about 2013 and 14. And really, we've showed that information, that data around for the last 5 or 6 years. And today it continues to produce papers. In fact, I just had a conversation with 𝘸𝘁𝘂𝗪𝗏 last week that one of the final papers is in for consideration for publication. So from a scientific standpoint, it was a great investment for the pork producers, because they created a database that can be mined for years to come around gilt management and that sort of thing. So just a really good project. A lot of good information came out of there. We produced an entire National Hog Farmer Blueprint series based on that. And so, that information was presented at layman conference and at Pork Academy, at World Pork Expo, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of different places that producers can find that information around gilt management and sow longevity.
Very cool. Anything that comes to mind as a few highlight on takeaways for you, but also that you've seen the change so far in the industry?
Yeah, so one of the things that 𝘸𝘁𝘂𝗪𝗏's project demonstrated was that there is a phenotype for an average piglet birth weight in a litter. And so sows that have a low average piglet birth weight will always have a low average piglet birth weight, regardless of the number of pigs that they have in the litter, okay? And they will never go above average, okay? So you could keep them in for 3 or 4 parities, and if they had one as a gilt, they will always have lightweight pigs when they farrow. And likewise, there's about 20% of the sows that have an average heavyweight pig, right? So their pigs are heavier than average, and they never go below average, right? And so that was really, I think, a fundamental understanding of that particular issue. And producers have those sows buried in their herds, and they have never identified them because few producers actually weigh piglets at birth. So they keep them in as gilts. But I would bet that those light birth weight pigs represent probably 40% of the pigs that are left in the barn on the 3rd pole, you know? And so that's a drag on our system that we've been able to identify. I know that there are a few producers out there and genetics companies that are beginning to look at that, right? Because one of the things that they said was, we've got this population of replacement gilts. They come in as sows in the herd at the genetic nucleus stage. They never send another female downstream to the multiplication phase. Okay. So we have them in our genetic nucleus herd, but they never contribute to the overall genetic improvement of the system. So it's just to me, that was one of the big gee whiz. That's a pretty profound finding for that particular research effort.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, yeah, I've seen some genetic companies now, like you said, selecting for birth weight, which is everyone, I think, says, thanks God, because for the last 20 or 30 years, we know 2 things, right? As nutritionists, we made sows fatter, trying to fix the birth weight, and we haven't fixed. And now, I have good conversations with geneticist friends, jokingly, thanks. Yeah. I'm glad you guys admitted who was in charge of that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So
cool. And then anything else on that one, or you want to move to the 3rd one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
So what would be the 3rd great study there, Chris?
Yeah, so that was the sow lifetime productivity effort, was really sort of our first foray into a consortium type of research project. But at that same time, and I think you may have been trained under this grant, the feed efficiency grant that was held between Iowa State and Kansas State, where there was a research component, a training and outreach component associated with them as well. And the Animal Science Committee really looked at that as a model, and they said, we can do better in terms of how we conduct research. And really, the idea around pig survivability is improving pig survivability is a big issue. And I know that, producers are concerned about finding a hole in their production, creating a hole in their production right now through selective euthanasia, and so that they can meet the slowdown due to the packing plant. So I totally understand. We're not talking about pig survivability today like we were 2 or 3 years ago, right? But the bottom line is, 35% of the pigs were not reaching market weight, and regardless of how you look at that, that's a poor business model for us. And so our industry really needs to take a very sharp look at that. And so our pork producers on the Animal Science Committee identified that as one of the areas that's a big research project, right? To get your arms around improving ways of improving pig survivability. And so we put a request for proposals out there for a consortium approach. It's a multifactorial problem, meaning there's lots of reasons why pigs die or are culled from the herd. So let's look at all of those. And so we selected a consortium led by Jason Ross at Iowa State University, but I think there's 17 consortium members from 3 different institutions. Purdue, I know Kara Stewart was on your podcast just last week, maybe, and she's one of our investigators on that. And then Mike Tokash and the Swine group at Kansas State are on that, as well as the folks from Iowa State Animal Science, as well as vet school. And just a great way of really focusing our producer dollars in a very important way to really sort of make progress against it. So in this particular instance, the Animal Science Committee, I believe they put up about $700,000 for supporting that. And then the Welfare Committee, the Animal Welfare Committee, put up another $300,000 to support it. So we had $1 million. And we took that $1 million to the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. And they said, yes, this sounds like a way of improving efficiency of production. And so we want to support that. So the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research matched that money. So we leveraged our producer dollars 2 to 1 right there. So we put in $1 million, they put in $1 million. And so for $2 million, we've got a group of researchers that over the next 5 years will not only conduct research, but they have a very robust training program for their graduate students that will then come out of this program and go on to decision makers and leaders and program directors for the different pork producing companies, or they will go into academia and train the next generation of graduate students and undergraduate students. So, we think that training program probably has value for pork producers for the next 30 or 40 years as those graduate students right now transition to the industry and really make a difference for understanding how pigs can be managed differently to ensure that a larger percentage of them make it to market. And then finally, there's an outreach component, right? And one of the outreach components was the pig survivability, the International Conference on Pig Survivability that's being organized in Omaha, Nebraska in October of 2020. And so that's just one of the examples of the outreach effort. I think you had Jordan Gephardt on as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, absolutely.
About why pigs die, right, at different phases of production. And he's a great example of the outreach, that kind of thing is important. I know that that Amanda Chipman has made a series of small short videos explaining the research results from the sow prolapse study that they did. And so those are all outreach tools that we think our next generation of pork producers are really going to be using as they try to continually improve the way pigs are produced and raised. So this is a great project, I think, beginning to end, from the planning phases, how the Animal Science Committee really came around that idea of improving pig survivability, all the way through until we put the consortium in place. We did a funding consortium with partnering with FR. We did a research consortium, but also a training and outreach component as well. So it's just, I think it's just a great project. I'm confident that it's going to really change the way pigs are managed in the future.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. I mean, the feed efficiency conference, that was great. You know, you had the this beginning one, hey, what do we know? And then you had the end, what did we learn?
Yep.
Super cool on the pig survivability too. I mean, survival is the number one. I know you mentioned right now is a tough time, but this is temporary. I think most of us would agree, right? Long term, it's huge for the industry, survivability.
Yeah. One of the things that I really appreciate about the swine industry is the vision of the pork producers, right? They're just some really, truly visionary folks. Everett Faulkner is a great example of that. And I bring his name up because I think a lot of producers will know Everett as one of the past presidents of the pork board, but just a true visionary in terms of thinking about the way the industry will be in the next few years. And so having that sort of big picture vision for the industry and taking off the blinders of what's happening for me today, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking what's my business going to look like, 5 years from now and 10 years from now. I think the industry, one of the things I appreciate about the industry is just some really great thinkers in that space. And I think those folks are the ones that really have an appreciation for this type of research where we're trying to tackle difficult topics that no other funding organization is attempting to approach,
Yes. And it's funny because I'm a big fan of Elon Musk and SpaceX and those things. I even have his book up here. And I want to do this analogy, which is, I remember he's saying that, they don't have any plans. They never had any plans to make SpaceX a public company. Because when you do that, you're mostly focusing on short-term stuff, quarterly results, whatever. You don't focus on the long-term goal, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Yeah. And the reason I bring that up is because, like you said, I think a lot of times, even maybe from the supplier side or even from the producer itself, in my opinion, if there's not a common body looking at the extreme long-term sustainability stuff, not many people are going to be looking because we want to fix right now the fire and all those things. So, just a comment there.
Yeah, we certainly have to fix the fire, right? And we certainly, one of the things that we've really changed as an organization, and this COVID-19 has really brought out to us, is about a year ago, we changed the way that we do our strategic plan and the way we do business and the way we fund and support research at the National Pork Board. And that really has allowed us to be more agile and flexible in terms of what projects we were able to refocus and rededicate money within our organization to really help to address some of those things that producers needed in their time of crisis around COVID-19. And so, I think those things are extremely important to be able to address those. So we definitely don't want to lose sight of that, but you're absolutely right. That long-term planning, that vision, I think is key to making sustained changes for our industry.
Super cool. No, that makes total sense. Very cool. Well, the other question I guess I had, Chris, is some other countries, from Brazil, where I'm from, we don't have a similar or analog type of format, just from the research standpoint. I just want to get your thoughts, and also if you can share. I mean, there's over 25 countries that listen to the podcast. Majority is US, Canada, Brazil, but just want to, if you can have a word of a device or what's been your experience, the impact to the industry from having pork checkoff and those things.
Yeah, so I think back I certainly am not a true historian of our organization, but it started with nickels for profit, back way back in the day. And there were a lot of pork producers that were passionate about increasing the demand for their product, right? And that's really why the National Pork Board was established. It was to increase that demand from our consumers, both domestic and international. And international is absolutely amazing, right? 26% of our pigs that we produce in the United States go elsewhere globally. So we are a critical country for providing protein globally, right? It goes all over the world. And, you know, over time, it's evolved to be more of to also include training and outreach component, or training and certification component for our producers, right? Pork quality assurance, PQA plus, trucker quality assurance, all of those things are certification programs that we have here that we've established. But then also to have a research arm, right, where we can really fund research, and approximately 10% of our producer dollars are invested in research programs here at the Pork Board. And really, I would credit 𝘠𝗵𝗿 with changing the philosophy around the way that money is thought of, because he was a big proponent of a return on investment. And he says, surely you don't get 100% hit rate, right? But you would hope that, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or 40% of the projects that you fund are really, really good projects that give the producers really good information, right?
Right.
And then the others, those are sort of the home run type of things that we've talked about today. But there's a lot of hits that happen that just get producers on first base, right? And those are critically important in establishing the program. So he had this idea of investing producer dollars rather than spending producer dollars on research. And I would say that's a philosophical shift that I really appreciate that Dr. Pullman was instrumental in making in the way we view the way we fund research with producer dollars. We certainly are not the only organization globally. I know Australia has the Pork CRC, the Roger Johnson research that they manage. You know, that is a wonderful program where there is a partnership, a true partnership between the producers and the Pork CRC, the federal government, to make this Pork CRC. There's sharing of funding support and decision-making around projects and that sort of thing. That's a great business model for doing kind of what we do here at the Pork Board.
Right.
Our neighbors to the north, Canada, you know, they have a robust support program for their pork producers as well. And then I would say one of the things that we really that I'm appreciative of is working with our sister organizations, and that would be the National Pork Producers Council, as well as our state pork organizations, state or regional pork organizations. We have, I think, 43 state and regional pork organizations that we work with. And it's really nice for us because back in, I believe it was 2005, the Pork Producers Council and National Pork Board were split as two organizations. And they, you know, council really takes care of all of our policy type of issues. And we're much more focused on the production, demand enhancement, international trade, those sorts of things. But we don't have to worry about the policy type of issues, and working with governmental organizations and that sort of thing is absolutely so more power to the Pork Producers Council for that.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thanks for your thoughts there. Anything else before we move to the 3 questions we ask every guest every episode?
Oh, you know, the only other thing I would bring to, as we're talking about training and outreach, the only other thing that I would bring up for our producers' knowledge is that this past year, in about November, we launched an effort to understand the workforce needs around technically trained personnel. So those would be folks like yourself with an advanced degree in nutrition, right? How is our industry going to use geneticists and nutritionists and reproductive biologists and folks that really are their decision makers? So we hired a firm called Look East, ran by Charlie Arnott, And that group has done 2 of the 3 phases. The first phase was to do a survey of our pork producers and really find out how they employ those staff members that have advanced degrees, masters or PhDs. What do they do? How are they employed? What are their needs in terms of, are you thinking about hiring somebody that's a nutritionist or a DVM in the next 2 to 3 years, right? The second phase then was really getting our arms around what are the needs in academia to train that next generation of pork producers for our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third phase will be to look at the allied industry. So our genetics companies, our feed companies, our equipment manufacturing companies, our data capture companies, our research companies, right? Because now there are research barns that you can hire and conduct research in. So what does our allied industry look like in terms of their needs for people with advanced degrees, to really get an understanding of whether or not the current graduate programs are meeting the need. And then number 2, as we look 10 or 15 years down the road, what does that advanced degree look like? I think it might look like something like a swine nutrition degree with an MBA. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So having that business acumen to understand the business decision, but also to be able to understand the impact of changes in the nutritional program of a production company. Right? So that's just one example of what that might look like. So that's one of the projects that I would like our producers to kind of keep on the horizon, as one of those projects that's really going to begin to pay dividends for us, I think. So
super cool. Yeah, that's super interesting to understand, how to educate the new generation. So super cool. And definitely, I mean, of course I'm biased, but one thing that for me is clear is the way to communicate, especially using the internet. I mean, we're in 2020 and this is huge, right? I think we can use a lot more of that to just communicate.
Yeah, I think that's changed that whole philosophy for an old dog like me, Marcio. That's really changed because of COVID-19, right? And that the opportunity, I've been working from home for 3 months now, and just that opportunity to interact with not just pork producers, but my fellow staff members and bosses and that sort of thing, through video conferencing and daily conference calls and that sort of thing. It changes that whole philosophy about the face-to-face type of interaction and the use of technology for conveying information, right? That's really what it's all about.
Yep. Perfect. So Chris, what's your favorite pig-related book or resource?
Sure. I still go back to the old pork industry handbook. I've got one that sits on my shelf, and I refer to that on a regular basis. I used it as one of my textbooks when I was teaching swine production back at Washington State, and then again at South Dakota State. And it's still just a great wealth of information, though some of it's beginning to become a little dated. It's still just a wealth of information for pork producers. So that's a great one.
That's cool. How about your favorite book in general, not related to pigs?
Well, I'm an avid reader, and it's hard to narrow down my favorite book. But 1491 by George C. Mann is a story about the Americas prior to Christopher Columbus coming. And I think it's just a really well done, well-researched book. It's pretty thick, but it's a great summertime read. That's
cool. Awesome. Yeah. I've never been much of reading history, but recently I've been more inclined to do so.
Yeah, it's because you're getting older, Marcio.
That's probably it. You're probably right. Cool. So lastly, what do you think sets apart successful swine professionals from those who are not?
Yeah, I think the ability to employ critical thinking and reasoning, as well as willingness to adopt or try at least new technologies. The swine industry has always had folks that are considered early adopters, especially when you look around the barnyard, as I like to say, right? You look at some of the other livestock industries, and the pork industry has always been on the front edge of technology. And I'll just go back to the understanding that the impact that having the swine genome would have from our pork producers, So that really sets, in my opinion, that really sets apart the successful pork producers.
Super cool. Very good. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for your time. Great research being done there in collaboration with many producers and universities. So appreciate you sharing some of that.
Absolutely, Marcio. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be your guest today. Hopefully people find it of value. And I would say that, the last thing I always like to close off my podcasts or webinars with is just encourage people to go visit pork.org. We just have a great, resource for COVID-19 related information, but also our research webpage, the things that we're doing from a promotion standpoint. I think it's just a great place for producers to get a lot of information.
Absolutely. We'll make sure to drop the link for the folks as well on the notes here. And I appreciate, Chris.